Hey, welcome to my floor. Thought we could just have a nice little floor conversation like we're buddies. We are buddies. You're my buddy. But yeah, I've debated a lot on whether or not to make this video, and I'm really nervous to make it, to be completely honest, but I do think it's important. So you can all probably already have an idea of what this is about by the title, obviously, but something I haven't really shared, especially not on here, really, I don't think so. And if I have, it's been very vague, is that I did spend a night in jail in 2019. And the reason I think this is important to talk about, even though I'm nervous to talk about it, is because as a trans person, I know, especially before I ever experienced being in jail, I often wondered, like, what happens to me as a trans person in jail. I remember having a conversation with my counselor like a year before my arrest where I was like, if I were to ever go to jail, like, what, where would they put me? And, neither one of us really had any real answers for that. And also, as like just a trans person who shares my experiences and stuff on here, a lot of times in the past I've gotten these comments that are kind of like, oh, well, if you go to jail, then you're not going to want to be trans anymore. Like, you're not going to want to be a guy in there, like, and stuff about, like, sexual assault in jail and stuff like that. Just things like as if that's supposed to be, like, a reason why I shouldn't be trans or don't truly, I'm not truly trans or something. I don't know. I don't really understand the logic behind it. But it's a thing that people like to bring up as like a reason against trans people, or like to kind of like make it like, oh, I got you with this, and it's like not really. But that's part of the reason why I wanted to talk about this. A little bit after my arrest, I actually got one of those comments that was kind of like talking about jail and sexual assault, and like basically saying, oh, I bet you wouldn't want to be a guy in there. And it's like, no, that's not really how it works. Instead of thinking of like the person, so like me being in jail, why don't we think about like the system of jail and prison and all that, and recognize that it's not, well, on top of the whole system, I have feelings about the whole system of jail and prison and the criminal justice system as a whole that I won't get into, but let's just go and say, since we do have jails and prisons and stuff like that, I think it kind of like, I don't understand why we're focusing on the people who are put into these systems instead of the system itself. It's like, no, me as a trans person being in jail, like, that has nothing to do with me being trans, but the way that I'm treated in jail, or the way the structure of jail is set up, that has everything to do with it not being set up for the existence of trans people. And that's the problem, not me being trans, but the system being set up the way it is. And I just want to like reframe that. And I know like a lot of the people who leave those comments aren't going to care about that, but it's something I struggled with a lot. And in the past of just like, well, I don't fit into society, so I'm the problem. But it's like, no, the problems with the structures and the institutions that have made it so that to just deny my existence completely. That's where the problem is. And I just want that message to get to anyone else who might be struggling with feeling the ways I felt in the past. So yeah, back when I was arrested, I well, a little bit after I was arrested, I did a anthropology project for college on the incarceration experiences of LGBTQ plus individuals, in which I included my personal story of my experience in jail. And I only spent 18 hours in jail, so it's not like I have a good understanding of what happens like if you go to prison or if you're in jail for a longer period of time. But nonetheless, I do have that experience of of those 18 hours and what that was like. And I think it goes without saying that, like, I can't speak for what it's going to be like for everyone. There's so many different factors. Um, Trans women are some of the most vulnerable individuals when incarcerated, and so I don't want to like speak on behalf of any of that. I don't want to speak for any of that because that's not my story and that's not my experience. And also, of course, it's going to be determined on so many factors like where you are, what state you're in, like so many different things. So this is just my personal experience, and I just hope it can give an idea of what an incarceration experience, a jail experience for someone who is trans could be like. So I did this whole recording of my experience back for this anthropology project, and it's been unlisted for a while on this channel, but I'm going to attach it to the end of this video so you can listen to what my experience was actually like. And the only thing I want to say about that is when I recorded it, there are a few things I wish I had said better. I mean, I try to cut myself some slack because I know I was talking about a traumatic event. So I don't think I conveyed everything in the best way possible. But one thing I do want to address real quick is there's this part where I kind of talk about how no one really knew I was trans. I gave that information myself, and I kind of talked about different things about me that help people not know I'm trans, like, I've been on testosterone and stuff like that. And I just want to make it clear that I wasn't trying to say that there's a way to tell trans people from people who aren't trans, from cis people. Uh, in fact, there's many instances of people being mistaken for trans because you can't tell a cis person from a trans person. There's so many variations within humans, like it's just that's just not what I was trying to say. But what I was trying to say is whether you're trans or cis, when you pass as cis, or when you fit some of those societal structures of gender, sex, even sexuality, gender expression, and things like that, there's certain privileges that could come with that. So like for me, what I was trying to say in the audio file is basically just like no one suspected that I might even be trans, or like that never came up, or no one suspected that I might even be um, not the gender I identify with. And so it was my information to share, and I chose to share it, and that's kind of how the situation unfolded for me. Someone who might be suspected of being trans, whether they're trans or cis, or someone who might be suspected of being the opposite gender of what they actually identify with, or a different gender from what they identify with, that situation might be different. They might not have the same, or might not be as simple for them to not share that they're transgender, or that they are like not the gender they are being assigned by the officers, like it might be different situation in that case, whether the person is trans or cis. So that's kind of more what I was saying, and I don't think I conveyed that as well as I wish I had. So I just wanted to put that little disclaimer there. But anyways, like I said, I'm super nervous to even be talking about this, to be sharing this, but I do think it's important. And I know I was really curious about how it all works out. And it's important to me to be able to take my experiences, especially when they're not great, and do something with them that I feel like gives them some kind of, even just the tiniest bit of purpose for me having to go through that. And then the last thing I want to say is that for anyone who has been arrested, no matter how long or short it was, being in jail or prison or whatever, being arrested in itself, being in jail for any amount of time is like, it can very much be a traumatic event. And I just want to validate that because it took me a while to validate that for myself. And, through counseling and stuff, I've been able to, but I want to validate that for anyone else who may have experienced anything like that. I just wanted to share this experience with you all, and I thank you all for sticking with me, for watching my videos, and supporting me. It truly means so much to me. I'm going to sign off now, but that audio file that I recorded a while back is going to follow. So, as always, stay strong, stay safe, and stay you. I love you all. I'll talk to you soon. Peace.
I am a 24-year-old trans man living in Texas, and today I'm going to share a little bit about my experience in jail in Denton, Texas. I was there for about 18 hours. I was there overnight, and this is just going to be a little bit about that experience as a trans man. So, for some context, today's date is April 3rd, 2021. This experience I'll be talking about happened in April of 2019. I think it's worth noting that I had undertaken medical transition years prior to my arrest, and I had also gotten all my documents changed, my ID, and my birth certificate to same mail. So, as far as like appearance or document wise, there's really no way to tell that I was transgender or a different sex assigned at birth. I had had top surgery years prior, but I've never had bottom surgery, and it was for that reason that I personally decided to let the police officer know that I was transgender, because the way the jail was set up, the bathroom, there wasn't much privacy, and you basically share the bathroom with everyone who is the same gender as you. So I didn't really feel comfortable sharing that bathroom. And going into it, I knew that I would probably be put alone, but I thought that they would at least gender me correctly and things like that, which I'll get into that a little bit later. But after letting the officer know that I was transgender, I still hadn't been put into the jail yet. There's like an outside part where they process you, or the police officer writes his report and stuff while you just kind of sit there. And then there's like a plastic glass type window thing where they take all your stuff through and they kind of further process you before you actually go in and get searched and go into the jail. And so right after I told the officer outside of, I hadn't even been checked to go into the jail yet, that I was transgender, one of the officers inside the jail came up to the window and just kind of went, "So what is he, she, it?" So that was kind of my first experience with realizing that this probably wasn't going to go as smoothly as I hoped. So then going into the jail, they asked me, the officer who was processing me, the officer who had arrested me, asked me if I wanted a male or female to search me. I said I didn't really care. And the search wasn't it was just kind of like a quick pat down. But they said my compliance with them really made them not worry too much about doing anything to, I don't know. They usually handcuff you before you get searched, before you go back into the jail. They handcuff you again. They decided not to do that with me, and they said it was because I was so compliant and chill, whatever that means. So then once I got into the jail, they started kind of asking me about my ID. They were like, "So your ID says male," and I was like, "Yes," and all these things. And then the same guy who said the he, she, it comment pulled me over to the table and basically was like, "Sorry if this is blunt, but do you have a penis?" And he asked this like in front of like everyone in the jail, all the other officers at the desk. There were like probably 5 officers around, and then all the other people in jail were not too far away. So anyways, I told them no, and they said, And he said, okay. And then this other officer asked me if I'm gay or straight, and I kind of looked at him because I personally don't identify as gay or straight. I tend not to really label my sexuality too much, but if I had to, I would probably either go with bisexual or asexual. So I kind of looked at him and he was like, I know it's a weird question, it doesn't really matter. And I was like, well, I don't know, I like both. And he was like, okay, we'll just put you down as gay then. So after that, the officer who asked me about my genitalia, and the same one that called me he, she, it, basically took me to a cell all by itself. So the way the jail was set up, it's like a big waiting room, is what I call it. There's like a wall and two sides of this big waiting room. It was literally just lines of chairs, and that's where everyone would sit until they were, until they had their bail or they went to the actual jail part of the jail. So it was more like a holding area, and men were on one side facing one way, women were on the other side facing the other way, separated by a wall. But then there were like maybe like 8 cells, individual cells, lining the sides of the walls. So he took me over towards one of the cells and said, "You'll probably just want to be in here since you're like trans." Basically, he didn't say since you're trans, but he was just like, "You're probably gonna want to be in here," and put me in there by myself. And the thing about being in there by yourself is it's more than just being by yourself or being away from other people. Like, I was grateful to have my own bathroom for sure, instead of having to share with the men just because of privacy and because I've had bottom surgery. But the thing is, you also lose like a lot of other things. Like, everyone else had this big digital clock so they could see the time. I had no clock at all. The clock was out of my view completely, so I had no sense of time the whole time I was in there. Everyone else had these TVs they could watch. There was a TV on the men's side and a TV on the women's side. And while I could see the women's TV, it was super far away. I could only see it if I was standing up right at the window of my cell. And so basically I didn't have that. And then also everyone else had these lines of phones they could just use whenever they wanted to. You could just get up and use it. But I didn't have that. I had to rely on the guards to bring me a phone, and I had to call them through a little buzzer if I needed them to bring me a phone. So just different than everyone else. I also had to use the phone through a like slot in the door. It wasn't just like everyone else could just use the phone. So those were all things that kind of I didn't really have the same access to as everyone else because I was put alone because I'm transgender. And I really thought that being put alone meant that they were going to respect my gender identity, my pronouns, and that is what was on my ID too. So I thought that's how it was going to go, but that's not how it went. I soon learned. So the next day when they took us to the magistrate, there was this female officer who basically kept misgendering me. She lined us all up. She lined all the men up, and then she lined me up, and then she got the women. And she told one of the women to go stand behind that girl in the white shirt, basically. And I was the only one in a white shirt. But in my mind, I was still like, well, maybe she just made a mistake, or she can't, be talking about me. But she was talking about me, I learned, because when we went into where the magistrate is, it was again separated by men and women. And she said men on the right, women on the left, didn't say anything to me the whole time. So I started going towards the right because that's how I identify and that's what's on my ID. And she said, again, like women on the left. And I said, but male? And she said, no, you on the left. So I realized quickly that they were not going to respect my gender identity or my pronouns or anything like that. And that also pretty much outed me to everyone in the jail because until then they didn't really know why I was isolated from everyone else. They just knew I was, but as soon as she did that, it was pretty obvious that I'm transgender to anyone who might have connected those pieces. So that was that was an uncomfortable experience to say the least. But then after after that, I was put back into the cell by myself for a little bit, and then a guard came by and came in, a different officer that I hadn't interacted with before, and asked me if I wanted to go sit on the outside where everyone else was with the TV and the clock and all that stuff. And I looked out, and again, just even like just naturally, I looked towards the men's side to see who's out there and if I feel comfortable. And she saw me looking towards the men's side, and she said, "You'll be on the other side, the women's side, and there's no one over there right now." And at that point, I was just like, "Yeah, sure." And I was just ready to get out of there, and I didn't even realize that there was a clock out there at that point, but I knew I'd have a TV to at least pass some time until my parents came with bail. So I just said, yeah, that's fine. So went out. She let me out, and I sat on the women's side and watched some TV. And even after that, there was one point where a different officer came over, and they started kind of questioning me. They were like, "Hey, did you just come out of there?" Like they didn't really realize because just looking at me, they didn't understand why I was on the women's side. And a different guard, the guard that let me out, explained it. I don't know what she said. I couldn't hear, but she came over and talked to that guard, and they didn't question me anymore. So yeah, that's a little bit about my experience in Denton County Jail. I feel like there might have been one or two things that I forgot, but I think that's a pretty good summary. And overall, it was about 18 hours. It wasn't very long at all in comparison to what some people go through with incarceration and being in jail or prison. And but undoubtedly, being transgender, being a trans man, played a role in my experience for sure. So I just wanted to share that, and that is where I will leave that for now. I definitely have a lot of experiences. I ended up doing having to do a program within the criminal justice system that also had a lot of difficulties around my gender identity and my sex assigned at birth and navigating all that. And I will probably talk about that too at some point, but I wanted to leave this one just about my experience in the actual jail. So, thank you for listening.